Conquer the Noise is a podcast produced by Unconquered, an independent agency challenging brand perspective through redefined content. This podcast is dedicated to telling stories of outstanding ideas and people who have found their way amongst the chatter. In the latest episode of Conquer the Noise, I'm speaking with Arjan Stephens, the Executive Vice President of Nature's Path and President of Pasa Mexican Foods. Nature's Path was started by his mother and father in 1967. They combined their creativity, their passion, and their knowledge to start a natural food store and bakery, which ultimately led to the creation of Nature's Path. Nature's Path is the first organic cereal manufacturing facility to open in North America. And we're going to talk about their triple bottom line approach consisting of people, planet, and profits, and how they use their packaging and shelf space as part of their marketing strategy. Arjan, thank you so much for joining us today. Let's jump right in. How did Nature's Path start?
Just going back to the origin story of Nature's Path. Nature's Path was started by my dad and my mom. But the origin of it was back in 1967 when my dad started the first vegetarian restaurant in Western Canada. It was called the Golden Lotus. 1969, he married my mom. He went to India. He was searching for truth and peace. And he found that through meditation and plant-based living, vegetarianism. And he ended up having arranged marriage to my mom. This is a white Canadian guy going to India, found a spiritual teacher. Then he ended up getting an arranged marriage to my mom. He didn't have any money. And he took a loan to bring my mom back to Canada. And he thought he was marrying a very simple Indian woman. But who he actually married was a firecracker. My mom is extremely entrepreneurial, very dynamic, an amazing woman. And they're still married today from 1969 to today.
Congrats.
And thank you. Together, they combined all this creativity and passion and knowledge for vegetarianism, for mindfulness, for meditation. And they started the first natural food store in Western Canada in 1971. From there, it evolved into a bakery and lots of different products. In 1985, they started Nature's Path together, making the first certified organic breakfast cereal products. So vegetarianism, veganism, plant-based was always sort of the foundation of Nature's Path and giving back to communities. My dad started the business with $7 and a $1,500 loan. And he actually used that $1,500 to go and buy all this used restaurant equipment from a restaurant that went bankrupt down the road. And he carried all the equipment back by himself.
Wow.
Those 2 or 3 blocks and walked them into the new restaurant. So that creativity, that passion for food was instilled in us at a young age. My sisters and I have 3 older sisters. And, ever since a young age, we had to work in the restaurant. We were dishwashers or busboys at the cashier. And then when the cereal plant opened up, we used to get paid a penny per sticker to label the boxes. We also had to do all sorts of odd jobs, but it was fun. It was all part of the family business. And a lot of struggles when the business first got started. None of the equipment worked. We didn't know how to make cereal. We got into making organic cereal, and took out all these bank loans. We had investors, and nothing worked.
I mean, that sounds par for the course of starting a business when you've never made it before. You're bound to have some hiccups, but it sounds like not having equipment work is a huge issue. What was that a result of? Is that because of like a lack of knowledge, or just because the equipment, frankly, just wasn't of good quality?
It was great equipment from Germany. So it's this cereal making equipment, very specialized, and we didn't have the knowledge or experience. But they also sent over a number of experts from Germany and from around the world to try and get this equipment going, and nothing actually worked. So at the last possible moment, when the banks were circling and saying, "Hey, you've broken all the covenants, you're not able to continue to operate," we got one very last expert who came and said, "Hey, just throw in a bucket of water at this part of the process." And we were able to make cornflakes from that moment on. But before then, I didn't I remember not seeing my dad for 6 months. He was literally sleeping at the factory around the clock, just trying to get it going.
Yeah.
And my mom, she still had the restaurant, so we were just, she was looking after all four of us.
That's
and it was
that's intense. Like, when you think about the work-life balance, it does not sound like there's a work-life balance there. It sounds like you're investing everything you can into making these two things work. And I'm curious to how that has affected you now. I mean, I'm sure that has instilled some level of resilience or can-do attitude.
Growing up, one of the biggest things I remembered from my dad was he always quoted Winston Churchill. He's like, "Never, never, never give up." So that sort of persistence, resilience to keep going forward, and something that as I've stepped into leadership position in our family business, is really to look after our team members. And it was really highlighted in the last couple of years of COVID, of course, during the pandemic. And then even now, even more pronounced with all the supply chain challenges that we face every single day. Just trying to get products onto store shelves, with the war in Ukraine, with all the food that's grown there and the food shortages that we're seeing and we're going to continue to see over the next year. That's been another key focus for us. And just not giving up, trying to find a solution, and understanding now with the scale that we have close to 900 team members.
Wow.
What we can do to make sure that they're able to provide for their families as well.
You guys purchased a farm, I don't know, in the last 5 years or so, or longer than that. But it sounds like part of that, as I dug in a little bit about that, is in Saskatchewan, if I remember correctly. It sounds like part of that was, one, to help ensure some quality control within the organic farming, but also it seems like it's helping a little bit more of the vertical integration as far as being able to create and work within, not rely on other outside supplies. Is that true, or are you having to import stuff from Ukraine and other countries that produce a lot of wheat and so forth?
We're very fortunate to have the farm in Saskatchewan. It's 5,500 acres.
Yeah.
It represents probably about 10% of the wheat needs that go into our products. But
wow.
Just with the global supply chain, we source almonds from California, sugar from Brazil, all organic, fair trade, of course. We get sustainably sourced and fair trade organic cocoa from Italy, and they get the cacao from Africa. So it's truly, the food industry is really, it's global. Getting high quality ingredients from around the world. We source most of our grains though from the prairies. So our oats, our wheat, our corn, it's either from the Midwest of the United States or from Canada. And we try to source everything that we can locally, but there's so many great ingredients that are found in the jungles of Brazil to, the sugar plantations in Brazil that are doing amazing things, regenerating the earth. And our own farm in Saskatchewan has been able to provide us the ability to not only become more vertically integrated, but also test new agricultural practices and share them. So we've been able to make that farm regenerative organic. And we're the first farm in the world oat farm to actually become regenerative organic, which is a cool new standard that's been pioneered by the Rodale Institute to ensure that we're actually putting carbon back into the soil versus just taking it out and putting it into the atmosphere, which non-regenerative farming would do.
Yeah. And I assume, that comes from just, I think, a really strong level of brand values and having a foundation of things that you also believe in and support. And this is a manifestation of that. And one of the things that, after spending some time on your website, I was reading through this idea of the triple bottom line that Nature's Path operates on, and it's on social responsibility, environmental responsibility, and financial viability, in that order. And I'm really curious. I've never heard of that before, and I'm really curious what that is, what that means, and then how that trickles through the rest of the business.
If I was to simplify the triple bottom line, it would be people, planet, and profits. Triple P. And for us, we have to be profitable. That fuels our growth. It fuels all the things that we can do to better the environment. It fuels our ability to support organic agriculture. But that isn't the reason why we exist, just to serve the profits for our shareholders. Really, the reason why we exist is to look after our communities, to make our customers healthier through organic foods. The chemicals that we're putting out into the environment as a society in terms of the agricultural world is just devastating. It gets into the air, it gets into the water, and then we consume it. So organic agriculture is that antidote. It is that ability to prevent these toxic chemicals from getting into our children's body, pass through mother's milk. And these chemicals are tied to cancer and autoimmune disorders. So organic and regenerative allows us to heal the world, to have healthier products, and to really make a difference.
Yeah, I was born when your parents founded Nature's Path. So I just hit 40 this past year in December. And upon hitting that, I have had a lot of friends with cancer scares who have had cancer. And I was talking to a friend the other night about it. And we were just opining on what's the cause of this. Is it pollution? Is it the amount of plastic that we use? Is it the amount of plastic where we're cooking food in? Is it because some of these things are in the soils? And I think you led to it a little bit as far as the toxicity of some of the chemicals that we're using on our food. So I take it regenerative farming does not do a lot of that. And I think I should say regenerative organic farming, because there is a difference. And I think that might be a great point for you to highlight to our listeners who aren't as familiar with the various farming practices.
And that's one thing as people shopping the supermarket, you can see more and more of in the coming years is really regenerative claims. So regenerative means that you're using farming practices that aren't releasing carbon into the atmosphere. So things like no-till, where you're not turning the soil and then carbon gets released in the atmosphere. But if you're not organic and you're just regenerative, you could still be spraying toxic chemicals like weed killers. You could be using GMO crops like corn, which produces its own pesticide or herbicide. And it's a step in the right direction, but you're still enabling all these chemicals to get into the air, into the water, and into our bodies. And these are toxic chemicals. So regenerative organic I think is the best. It's the gold standard of food, because not only are you helping fight climate change, but you're not putting these chemicals into the environment, and you're not using genetically modified ingredients either.
Now you hinted at something as far as people in the shopping aisles, more or less, making their choices and voting with their dollar, if you will. And I think you and I, just from what I've read, have a very similar feeling on the idea of like this feeling of conscious consumerism and supporting brands and businesses that are doing good or not harming people or have a level of ethics and standards. And I'm curious to how that plays into your own one, shopping choices, and two, then the decisions you're making for your own business. Because I think if you come with that mindset, it's going to ensure a better product in some ways.
I'll start with just my own little family. I have a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, 2 daughters named Ariana and Ciara. And I'm reminded of my grandfather. He was a pioneering organic farmer on Vancouver Island before the word organic even existed as it relates today in the organic food system. But he had a sign on his farm. It said, "No toxic chemicals or poisons used here." And he used to go down to the beaches with my father. They collected the seaweed and the kelp from the beaches of Vancouver Island. They brought it back to the farm. They spread it between the rows of the strawberries and raspberries. And he told my dad, always leave the soil better than you found it. So for us, you could take the soil or the earth, always leave the earth better than you found it. That's kind of the motto and foundational vision that we have here at Nature's Path. And also with my kids in my own little family. The choices we make, however small they be, can have a tremendous impact. So supporting organic agriculture, buying fair trade, knowing that you're supporting independent retailers whenever possible, family businesses. I think can make a difference. And it
Mm-hmm.
does make a difference, because when you have thousands and then millions of people thinking this way, collectively, the world's going to change. And we've seen that even with plant-based over the last, 5 years. As a kid, I was the only person that was vegetarian. Me and my sister were the only vegetarian people in our elementary school.
I heard
And
the
now,
same thing from my significant other. She said something very similar, and just the stigma around, growing up Indian, she had Indian food. The kids thought it was weird, and it was a whole nother, issue around that in itself for young kids growing up. But that's a whole nother topic.
Yeah, and I mean, now my two daughters, they have like 6 or 7 kids in their 2 classes that are vegetarian, and it's way more normal to go to a birthday party where people are like, oh yeah, we have these cupcakes for your daughter here. There's there's a cake. But as a kid, growing up, you usually had to bring that with you if you wanted to have anything, if your parents remembered. But it just shows that people making a difference, who are getting more conscious about their decisions, are really going to change the world, and are changing the world.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you point out is what I just want to acknowledge is just the independent retailers, and I think it's amazing that Nature's Path is as large as it is, and it's still an independent business. I think it's what the largest independent organic company in North America. Is that correct?
We are the largest organic breakfast company.
Okay,
definitely. I think in the world, because everything we do is organic.
Wow.
There's a lot of brands that have been bought out by the big multinationals.
Yeah.
And they might only have, say Kellogg's buys cashew. Well, only 1% of their sales, when you add cashew in there, might actually be organic.
And I assume that's just obviously a conscious choice. And is that just to maintain the integrity of the brand and the impact you're making, or is it deeper than that because it's has such a storied start from actually your grandfather back in the blueberry and blackberry growing days? So is that part of the thinking?
Yeah, it truly is the underlying philosophy. It's the bare minimum of what we do. Everything has to be organic at Nature's Path. Back during 2008, 2009, when the Great Recession hit, a number of our competitors actually converted their products from organic to quote unquote natural. Natural doesn't mean anything.
Doesn't mean anything.
Natural is whatever you want it to mean. Organic has like standards. There's audit tracing right back to the farmers. If you're caught frauding it, and people have been caught cheating the organic system, they face huge penalties, even jail time for that type of thing. So for us, organic is the bare minimum. Then we layer on fair trade. We would layer on regenerative organic. We do supplier audits to make sure that there's no child labor. All these type of things to make sure that the milk we're using is, for example, in a few of the products contain yogurt, is all sustainably sourced, and it's not just the bare minimum of organic. It actually is taking organic to the next level.
So there's no giving kids pennies, a penny per sticker anymore on the floors.
I think that's one thing that as the next generation gets involved in the business, that me and my sisters have been talking about, because we want Nature's Path and our family business to be around for generations. So how do we inculcate the next generation to share that passion, to understand the sacrifices that our parents went through to get this business started, to not take things for granted. We don't want them to be like these entitled kids, thinking that, hey, this is some piggy bank. This really should be a legacy for future generations. And so that's really what we're thinking about with the next generation. We have a number of my nieces and nephews. They're a lot older than my kids. They're in their between 16 and 23. And they've actually gotten involved in internships in the business, and they're discovering great. Some of their love of food and of our family business too.
Well, I think there seems to be a strong element of service within the company, as far as volunteer, giving back, supporting people during COVID, whether it's employees or food donations. And I think that kind of stuff from a young person's perspective, is what can help set the tone, and help create some of that legacy. So I think you guys, from an outsider's perspective, it seems like you're on the path to do that just through some of those actions, because words only say so much, and then once people start seeing it, seeing the benefit, and seeing the impact it actually makes, I think can inspire and connect the dots, and show the importance of keeping it independent and keeping it in the same sort of spirit, if you will. You mentioned natural, and I think that's one of those buzzwords, or one of those packaging terms that just drives me crazy when I walk through a grocery store and just see that idea. It's all natural. It doesn't mean anything, and it doesn't mean it's healthy either. And I'm curious, I think that is sort of a marketing, I think it's a marketing ploy or a marketing strategy. And I'm curious, what some of your biggest challenges are within marketing itself, is marketing the brand, because I know the brand because I look for products like this. I've been shopping and buying Nature's Ways product, or Nature's Paths products for a while. But I found them in the grocery store. I wasn't hit with an email or social media ad or anything like that. So it was no pun intended, organic. It's a very organic way of finding the product. So I'm curious to, what your marketing challenges are.
I think part of the root of our company strategy has been trying to make organic available to everyone. We think that organic shouldn't just be for the people that shop at, the specialty food stores. It should be available to people who shop at any grocery retailer. So for us, one of the underlying considerations that we've had to make is actually take a lower gross margin, a lower profit, to be able to make our price more accessible to more people. We still have a premium versus the non-organic cereals, but it's not as high of a premium, say, when you look at milk or even fruits and vegetables, where it might be double the cost. Right?
I mean, milk is double the cost. Depending on the brand, on average, when I shop, I'll see it's like twice the price. Sometimes there's like this, the grocery store will have its own white labeled organic milk, which is comparable to the non-organic, but it does take away the accessibility, or at least you're making a sacrifice somewhere else within your purchasing power, right? So I commend that. That's great. I didn't quite realize you guys were doing that.
Yeah. So when you take that lower profit, all of a sudden you have less sort of means, like you have less resources. So how can you become more creative in your marketing? Well, we definitely need to get on the store shelves. So that comes at a cost. That getting on the store shelves isn't free. You have to pay retailers to get on the store shelves, listing dollars and slotting dollars just to get your product on store shelves. Not everyone knows that who shops in the grocery store. And then what's the next biggest thing we can do is actually the packaging. Packaging is our biggest marketing vehicle for our business, because as you're walking by, is it differentiated? Is it unique? Does it give you the delicious flavors? Does it show your sustainability values? So those are two things that we've looked at. And then, of course, we have done campaigns. We got on the Super Bowl in Canada for the first time.
Congrats.
A couple of years ago.
That's great.
Thank you for Pasa, which was a brand we acquired about 8 years ago. It's a Mexican food brand. And they sold to us because they were another family and they didn't want to have it just be bought up by a big multinational. They wanted a company and a family that also shared their values. So we've kept that organic and we've expanded that across the United States and Canada. But really based on the packaging, the branding, we don't have big marketing budgets compared to the big guys we're competing against. So it's a bit like guerrilla warfare. In the old days, it was sampling and getting people food into people's mouths, attending dozens of marathons and shows a year. Now it's in the packaging and it's innovation too. So a lot of what we do is really trend forward, at least historically has been trend forward. And that's what we're trying to continue to inculcate as we've grown is, using ingredients that the big guys wouldn't use. So we were the first company to use flax seeds in a product, in a cereal product. That was in 1995. We used quinoa, if you could believe this or not, in our first best-selling product in 1991. So nobody
which
heard of
product was
quinoa.
that? Which
That's
product was it?
Our Heritage Flakes. So
It's great.
Heritage Flakes combined quinoa and kamut and amaranth and millet and sorghum and all these grains that nobody had ever heard of before in North America. So
well, I think it's really interesting, and I've only heard of half of those grains, truthfully. And so if I was in the aisle and I saw a product with that stuff, I would wonder what they are. So speaking of packaging as a marketing opportunity, are you trying to fill in I guess the blanks of education there to help say this is what this is what millet is, this is where it comes from, this is why it's good?
So on the backs of our packaging, we've shared those stories for years. Mm-hmm. Actually, we've shared them on the inside of our packaging too for some things. Back in the 90s, in the late 90s, 97, 98, when GMOs were first introduced, we put right on the front of the package, not genetically engineered. And the Canadian Retailer Association of Canada said, you can't do that. We said, well, of course we can. We said, well, if you want to be sold on our store shelves, which included all the major retailers across Canada, you can't put that on the front of your package. So we took it off the front of our package and instead dedicated all four sides of the inside to talking about non-GMOs and what the threat is here and how it's just being used to sell more chemicals and what you can do as consumers. So packaging is vitally important to share that message. And I mean, that's also our challenge, is that we have so many things, so many stories to tell as a company.
Yeah.
How do we simplify it? How do we create a compelling message that consumers can connect with when you have so many of them to share and they're all authentic?
Yeah, they are. And I was personally just drawn to the family story and one going back to your grandfather. That's part of the story. And then just the resilience and hard work your parents put into establishing it. It takes serious, I think, guts and belief in what you're doing when you're strapped with those many challenges and while having a family. And I think there's a lot of opportunity just to lean into that family story because if it's created for the good of your own family, people are going to want to buy for their family, I think. And there's just some trust in there. And I think that trust is one of those things that is one of the most important, I think, aspects of that a brand can have in a relationship with its customers. And it isn't easy to get. It takes time. And 40 years is proof of that in some ways. And I think there are some things that we've been talking about really around entrepreneurialism and that desire to keep at it. And I'm curious, what do you think are some of these unspoken things that entrepreneurs need to have in order to be successful and see their dreams and businesses through?
It's interesting because we've worked with a number of entrepreneurs as well. We've invested in a number of food companies, some that have been incredibly successful, some that have failed, and some that have just done okay. But and then we have Nature's Path and some of what I've tried to carry on the entrepreneurial spirit in our business, launching products. And happy to talk about Love Crunch later as well. Which was a product I launched at my wedding. But if I was to distill a few of the characteristics that I've seen that makes certain entrepreneurs very successful, is the tenacity, not giving up, just charging forward, that belief in your product and idea, but then the ability to get feedback and surround yourself with people that will complement you, that have that expertise, that understand that knowledge. A lot of times, if you only listen to experts, you'll never launch a product as an entrepreneur. I remember when my parents first started, the bank said, why should we lend you guys money? A number of them said, until we found a bank that actually did. They said, Kellogg's is just going to crush you. How are you going to survive? And my dad had a good answer to that. He said, have you heard of David? Have you heard of Goliath? So there's always people who can come in and serve a particular niche. And if that niche expands and grows, well, you're going to have more and more customers. So for us, it was really like this crazy idea that the way that we're growing food, the way that it was being processed and marketed wasn't sustainable. And it was actually making people sick. And at the time, everyone thought, there's maybe 50 or 100 entrepreneurs who felt the same way across the food industry. And they started some of the greatest brands in the organic food industry today. But that belief that we could change things, that you could go up against the big guys, that you weren't going to fail. And then that drive and energy to actually make it happen.
And we were talking a little bit earlier about, how I was recently engaged and starting this new family. And you, as a result of your wedding, you stumbled into a new product. And I love how you were able to sort of test in some ways and get immediate feedback on how this tasted and people's opinions of it. And that's the Love Crunch. And I love the name. It's so on point for its evolution and its story. But how'd you get there? Were you just looking? 1,000 people is what I read you had at your wedding, or I think I heard you say that in another interview, which my eyes were like, size of softballs. I don't think I know 1,000 people. So I'm curious to how you got there. Was it I just need to feed 1,000 people, or were you had the idea? You had the idea and you wanted to test it out? Or I would love to hear that story.
Oh, I'm sure you're going to have a big Indian wedding,
yes.
Jonathan.
we're getting nudged there already. Yeah, I'm sure we will.
My wife and I, we met. Our families known each other for a while, but we actually met kind of more in a romantic way at a volunteer event. And after I proposed to her and we got engaged, she and I said, hey, we should really come up with something to give back to our guests and to thank them for coming. And in lieu of traditional wedding gifts, we asked all of our guests to do a gift of giving. So we had friends from around the world participate. We started a wedding website. This was back in 2009 and had all the stories and pictures that our friends sent in. And, we had friends in Germany who went to a train station and handed out tulips with love quotes on them.
That's so nice. I love that idea.
Yeah, it was beautiful. And they said actually a few of the people they gave the tulips to were crying because they said it was the first time somebody had ever given them flowers in their life. And it was during the hard time of the Great Recession, 2009, 2008. We had a quirky friend in Oregon who started a guinea pig sanctuary in our honor. And of course, we had a large number of friends who just did all sorts of more traditional gifts of like volunteering at a soup kitchen or volunteering with an organization that helps homeless people get ready for job interviews, like help them get a shower, a change of clothes, that kind of stuff. And we had one friend in Peru who went to a village in the highlands there and gave soybean seeds to villagers so they could plant some high protein crops there for their families and for their livestock. And to thank them for this, we developed Love Crunch. It was actually had our faces on it and had a wedding crossword. And it was a fun little favor, but it was like the most delicious ingredients that we loved. So we put like red berries, organic chocolate, the granola itself with chocolate and coconut and all this kind of stuff. And at the end, we also gave it to some of our long-term customers that we had relationships. So we gave to Whole Foods and to Costco and different retailers. But after 2 days, we had so many guests coming up to us and saying, hey, like, I already ate my box of Love Crunch. Where can I get more of it? We said, oh, we're not selling it. We just wanted you to enjoy it. And the Whole Foods buyer actually came to us and said, this is the most delicious product I ever tried in my life. I need to sell this product.
Wow.
And then we said, well, our guests also said the same thing. So we launched it with Whole Foods to start with. And as part of the giving back component, we started supporting their microfinance organization. It's the Whole Planet Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And they were actually giving microloans out to women in various countries starting their own businesses.
Mm-hmm.
The woman might be buying a sewing machine, or they might be buying a couple goats and then selling the goat milk, or knitting or sewing for their communities. And they're actually able to get their families out of poverty by being able to now afford school tuition for the kids to go to school, or pay medical expenses, all these types of things. And it actually became the second best selling product we had at Whole Foods in that year that we launched with them. And then after that, we said, okay, well, let's launch it, but instead of just supporting the Whole Foods Foundation, let's actually make it larger. So we made sure that giving back was a continued component of this product. And for every bag sold of Love Crunch, we made certain that we give at least $1 million to food banks across North America of organic food. And I volunteered at food banks in the past, and oftentimes the food banks, you find the most, nutritionally devoid foods at food banks.
Yeah, I've spent some time in them. It's true. It's a lot of canned. What are some of those things that make it nutritionally void, in your opinion?
Well, it's like highly processed foods that are like white flour, white sugar, that don't have essential nutrients and vitamins, that are just chemically processed flavors and additives. So for us, actually giving organic food lives into our vision, which is to make organic available to everyone. Regardless of where you shop, or if you need to get it for free, well, let's support the food bank. So every year since we launched the product in 2010, we've given $4 million to different food banks of organic food, of high-dense, nutrient-dense product. And it all came from Love Crunch, the original wedding favor that we did. So
Well, one thing I do want to call out is you said on the second, after 2 days, people were asking. So it sounds like you had a very traditional multi-day a wedding. Did you go 3 or did you go longer than that?
I think it was 8 days wedding.
Wow.
It was
that's
in
a party.
India.
That's a long party.
Then we had a reception in Chicago and in Vancouver. Her family's from Chicago. So it was a big fat Indian wedding.
Yeah. And that should be the next movie, I think, right there. Because that sounds like a serious party. My fiance made me watch my Big Fat Greek Wedding, both of them, 1 and 2, in preparation for what is to come, which I think is very accurate, because I do come from a very modest Midwest family, and we're not very loud, it's kind of even keel. You step 2 feet into one of their family's homes when everyone's there, and the volume is way higher. The music's on, much more festive. I've loved it. It's I find it energizing, exhausting, but I also find it energizing. And it's been something that I just love being a part of. So different than the way I grew up. And I'm sure our wedding, and I'm sure our it's going to be very similar to that. So we're getting close on time, and I would love to just wrap, I think, on I'm gonna go for, normally I ask for people to share advice that they'd give to their younger selves, but I want to add just one other piece of advice in there. And I think some of our listeners are marketing leaders within brands. Some of them are on the agency side, but I think we get approached people who haven't worked with agencies and ask us what we recommend or things that they can do to help make sure we have great collaboration, communications, part of our onboarding process, really. But I'm curious, since you've had the experience of working with creative agencies, PR agencies in the past, advice you would give other brands who are considering entering a relationship like that, and how to make it useful for them. It's an investment, so making sure that they get a return on that investment. It doesn't have to be necessarily dollars. Obviously, bottom line is always a big part of business, but there are other ways to get that return on investment. And just share some of your experience there. And then the other one, I'm going to go back to my traditional question and ask for you to get some advice to your younger self. You can start with whatever one you'd like. I kind of threw two at you.
I think as entrepreneurs, it can be a little bit frightening, I think, a little bit to work with agency because,
Mm-hmm.
You're used to doing so many things yourself, wearing so many hats. And
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden you'd be like, why am I paying another person this much money to help us with it? But if you can, and I think the first thing really starts with selecting the right partner.
Mm-hmm.
Making sure that your values are aligned, understanding what experiences they might have in relevant businesses or categories, how passionate they are about your product, and are you
Mm-hmm.
actually going to be getting the top talent at that agency's work?
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to have access to the principal or the people that are going to actually make a difference, or are you going to be thrown off to a
A
junior
junior.
person
Yeah.
in the firm? It's so funny because I remember getting pitched by 4 very large creative firms, and each one of them in their portfolio had referenced the same project, like the same campaign
Huh.
across all 4. And I dug in deeper. I was like, okay, one of them was like, yeah, well, I was on the strategy side at the firm who did this. Other one was the firm who actually did the work.
Huh.
Another one was a creative who used to work at that agency and said, well, I developed a creative for that, for this
Oh my
campaign.
gosh. Yeah.
So sometimes it can be very confusing as you're going through the selection process. But
Yeah.
again, I think trusting your gut at the end of the day, having a clearly defined scope of work
Mm-hmm.
and what you're getting, I think is really important, so that
Mm-hmm.
and at the end of it, and what success looks like, defining that up front. Is this a brand awareness campaign, or are we actually trying to drive some tangible results with the specific retailer?
Mm-hmm.
I think really being clear on that up front, and knowing that, because we've made a lot of mistakes working with agencies, and we've had to learn over the years
Mm-hmm.
some of these lessons. And really starting up front, I think is sets that foundation for a good relationship moving forward. And then you can evaluate, hey, are you getting that return on investment at the end of the day?
Mm-hmm.
Are we growing the brand? And then the goal, of course, is to find lightning in a bottle, where you set upon something so strong that resonates so well that your sales and your awareness grow, like
Mm-hmm.
exponentially versus just incrementally.
Mm-hmm. I think that's great advice. I love that. So thank you for sharing that. And I think it's something that I think there's just, like you said, there's a lot of confusion around what the process is and what they're expecting. And, we hire an agency and our sales are going to just immediately climb. And I think sometimes we see that there's not all engagements necessarily are geared towards that, as you have pointed out. And I think that's a really great differentiation and something to talk through. And then my last question, advice you'd give your younger self, or maybe even your kids. I mean, it's kind of same in some ways.
I think when I was in my 20s, I was so full of piss and vinegar, just wanting to
Mm-hmm.
make a change and do good and work hard, improve myself. Because coming into a family business, oftentimes you're the owner's son or the boss's son. People don't really take you seriously at first. So you have to work doubly as hard, and you have to be more committed than everyone else. But I think the younger advice, I'd say, breathe a little bit more,
Mm-hmm.
take a little bit more time off.
Mm-hmm.
I was just so incredibly driven towards that achievement and that goal of making a difference, which is important and you need to have. But I think I could have taken it a little bit slower in some instances. And
Mm-hmm.
by going a little bit slower, I think I could have probably been a bit more impactful. But these are all lessons that I've learned. I don't regret anything, because I'm still learning. Every day I come to work and participate and get involved in the business, I'm learning something new. So I think that patience is important. And Yeah, I think looking at my kids, making sure that you have purpose and passion for what you're doing. I think passion is a fuel. It's not the
Mm-hmm.
be all and end all, but it is a
Mm-hmm.
fuel. It's a very important fuel because if you have passion with introspection, with continuing to develop your skills and awareness, you
Mm-hmm.
can achieve with a great team lots of things, lots of great things for this world. And it should be more than just yourself. It should
Mm-hmm.
be service, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what I truly believe in.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Really enjoyed having you.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you for allowing me to share some of our story with your listeners.
Of course. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining this week. I hope you'll walk away from this episode feeling energized and inspired. If you haven't already, please go on over to the Apple Podcast app and leave a review. Thank you so much. See you next week.